Hello, I'm really glad you're here. On this channel, I share simple, quiet stories about life, love, and the little feelings we all go through. If that sounds like something you enjoy, don't forget to subscribe. Every subscriber gives me a little more encouragement to keep telling these stories. Now, let's begin today's story. The early autumn breeze slipped through the old maple branches, sweeping golden red leaves along the narrow road that led to Wyndham Hospital, a three-story brick building, worn but warm, tucked into the town of Greenfield, Vermont. The hospital sat at the bottom of a slope, facing a row of old-style houses, including a two-story wooden home with a red-brown porch. It stood clearly in view from the window of room 205, where Thomas Greaves was spending his final days. Mila Fletcher, 27, had left Boston after 3 years of working in the state's largest ICU. She came to Greenfield like someone arriving at a quiet rest stop. Hoping to find a slower rhythm and something medicine in the city had quietly drained from her human connection. Her first shift began with a flimsy name tag and a brief remark from Dr. Harold, who oversaw the inpatient ward.
Thomas Greaves. Last room at the end of the hall. Doesn't talk much. No family, no visitors. Doesn't need anything except that window.
Mila nodded without question, but as she gently pushed open the door to room 205, she paused. A pale golden light streamed in from the window, falling across a frail figure sitting motionless like stone. The man with silver hair, lined skin, and shoulders sharp beneath a thin blanket didn't turn when he heard the door open. He just kept looking out. Through the glass that was fogged faintly with morning mist. From where she stood, Mila could clearly see the house across the street just beyond a narrow road, a classic New England home with dark brown shingles, a wooden porch, and white curtains drawn over its windows. Inside, a dim light glowed, casting soft shadows of a family gathered for dinner. Nothing unusual, yet something about it made her pause longer than expected. Mila stepped softly into the room, checking the IV line and oxygen monitor. All vitals were stable, at least according to the machines, but there was something about the silence in that room that unsettled her.
I'm Mila, the new nurse. Today's my first day here.
The man gave a small nod, his eyes still fixed on the window. He didn't greet her, didn't smile, just sat there, as if guarding a memory the world had long forgotten. Somewhere beyond that quiet street, in the days that followed, Mila slowly adjusted to the rhythm of Wyndham Hospital, quiet, steady, and at times so still it felt like living inside a book that had yet to be written. She cared for many patients, each carrying an untold story, but none lingered on her mind quite like Thomas Greaves in room 205. He never called for a nurse, never complained of pain, never asked for anything. Each morning, when Mila pushed the medication cart into his room, he was already there in the same posture as always, shoulders slightly hunched, hands resting on his knees, eyes fixed beyond the window pane. The wooden chair by the window seemed marked by the silent patience of a man guarding time itself. At first, Mila thought it was simply routine, but by the third day, she noticed something else his gaze never wandered. He looked only at one place, the house across the street. Morning or evening, rain or shine, that was where his eyes stayed. One day, a sudden downpour blurred the glass with streaks of rain, turning the view outside into something like an oil painting. Mila stepped into the room and saw Thomas still sitting there, as if waiting for the rain to pass so he could see that house clearly again. She began to wonder, had that once been his home, or someone else's, someone so important that even in age and solitude, he still waited for something. One late afternoon, Mila arrived later than usual with his medication. When she entered, Thomas was in his usual spot, but this time, something was different.
It's gotten cold. Would you like another blanket?
Thomas didn't respond. His eyes stayed fixed outside.
What are you looking at?
For the first time since they met, Thomas turned his head. His eyes met hers, clouded but not empty. They held the weight of memories long buried. He looked at Mila for a long moment before speaking, his voice rough and slow.
I'm looking at the house where my son used to live. He doesn't call me his father anymore.
Mila stood still, a chill creeping up her spine from the cold hospital floor. Thomas turned back to the window as if the conversation was over. But in that moment, as rain softly tapped against the glass and silence wrapped around them, she knew a door had quietly opened. After that rainy afternoon, Thomas's words kept echoing in Mila's mind. He doesn't call me his father anymore. The sentence was spoken so plainly. Yet the way he said it, like a truth turned to stone, made it impossible for her to forget. Mila began paying closer attention. She adjusted her shifts to return to room 205 more often. Morning, noon, late afternoon, each time she entered, he was there in the same spot. On sunny days, the shadows of maple trees stretched across the street, casting sweeping shapes over the porch of the house beyond. Thomas sat unmoving, the tip of his finger gently tapping his knee as if counting the rhythm of time. Mila started watching the house across the street more closely. Through the window, she saw a blonde woman watering plants on the porch. A young boy, maybe 9, pedaled a bicycle around the yard. And a man middle-aged, bearing a faint resemblance to Thomas, would sometimes step outside, walking slowly, hands in his coat pockets, always looking down the road but never up toward the hospital. One day, as Thomas was caught in a fit of coughing, Mila rushed to pour him a glass of water as she held it out to him. She hesitated for a moment before speaking.
That house. Is that your son's?
Thomas didn't answer right away. He looked down at his trembling hands, then gave a soft nod.
He bought it after he got married. It's been years. I've never set foot inside.
Did you ever try?
Thomas pressed his lips together, his eyes drifting toward the window.
I stood on his porch once, Christmas Eve, 8 years ago. I brought a gift box, but no one opened the door.
He paused. Another cough made him lean forward. Mila rested a gentle hand on his shoulder, saying nothing. She noticed his eyes were slightly red, not from tears, but from something heavier, a longing that had never let go. After checking the IV line again, Mila left the room but didn't walk away. She lingered just beyond the hallway, watching him through the glass panel. Thomas remained in his chair, back turned to her. But somehow she felt it. He knew she was still there, like a nameless witness. That night, back in her small room in the hospital staff housing, Mila couldn't sleep. She lay, staring at the ceiling, her mind returning again and again to the image of Thomas sitting silently by the window. There was something in his posture, patient, stubborn, aching, that made her feel as if she were witnessing a story without an ending. The next morning, in the staff break room, Mila struck up a conversation with Sandra, an older nurse who'd worked at Wyndham for over a decade. She poured her a little more coffee and asked, casually,
Do you know anything about Thomas Greaves' room 205?
Him? Oh, not much really. He's been here a little over 3 years. No one liked him at first. Kept to himself. Hard to talk to. Looked at everyone like they were strangers.
Does he have any family?
Never seen anyone visit. They say he used to have a wife, a son. But no one's been in touch since the day he got here. A few years ago, he used to go for walks. Now, he doesn't even bother to leave that chair.
Mila furrowed her brow.
He doesn't seem like someone who cut off his family out of anger. Maybe it was something else.
I heard he used to drink. Got into trouble in town once drunk and disorderly. Got arrested. But they let him go. Some even say he did time. But no one knows for sure. He's lived alone too long.
Sandra shrugged, as if to close the subject. But to Mila, every fragment of information felt like another puzzle piece clicking into place. A father who once had a family. A shadow of scandal, a house across the street, and a gaze that never strayed from that single direction. That afternoon, when she brought in his lunch, she found Thomas dozing in his chair. The autumn breeze slipped through the cracked window, carrying the scent of damp wood and fallen leaves. She placed the tray gently on the table and stood there, watching him for a long moment. He was no longer just another anonymous patient. He was a story no one had bothered to hear. One no one had the patience to understand. And Mila, for reasons she couldn't explain, found herself wanting to be that person. Thomas sat quietly by the window, his gaze reaching out as if searching for somewhere far beyond what the eyes could see. Mila sat beside him, gentle, unhurried. She knew that for Thomas, opening up didn't come easily, but today he began to speak.
My wife, Emily. She was the only one who could put up with me. But then illness took everything away. She died 5 years ago by the time I was finally sober, when I had already quit drinking. But I couldn't keep her. I let her carry it all alone for far too long.
Mila looked at him, hearing the deep sorrow in his voice. Time doesn't heal everything, especially not when the past still haunts you.
After my company went under, I didn't know what to do. I started drinking to forget. I lost my job, lost my family, had nothing left but the bottle. Emily. She held on for a long time, but eventually she left. Took Alex back to live with her family. Not because I didn't love her, but because I made her suffer too long.
He paused for a long moment, his eyes distant, as if searching through memories that had slipped through his fingers.
After I got sober, I tried to change, but she was already gone. Emily died of illness. I never got the chance to say sorry. Never got to fix anything. She left while I was still buried in the wreckage of those wasted years.
Thomas turned to Mila, his eyes heavy, not with shame anymore, but with something deeper, something softer, unending grief.
I didn't try to stop them. I knew I had broken too much to hold on, so I let them go. But I still sent money every week, hoping Emily would use it. She never did. It was like I'd been erased from their lives completely.
Mila sat in silence, realizing that Thomas's pain didn't just come from loss, it came from a remorse that no apology could ever wash away. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. In that quiet moment, she had become the one person left who was willing to listen. In the days that followed, Mila couldn't stop thinking about what Thomas had said. He lived alone in that hospital room, yet just across the street stood a house, a place filled with a past he could never return to. Mila wondered if Alex, his son, still lived there. Was there still a thread between them? Did Thomas still hold out hope for a broken bond to be restored? To find out, Mila decided to investigate on her own. One quiet weekend morning, when she was off duty, she took a walk outside the hospital, crossed the narrow street, and approached the house Thomas had watched every day. She stood at the edge of the road for a while, studying the two-story wooden home. The house had a spacious yard and a small path that led up to the porch. Its reddish-brown paint had faded with time, but there was still something warm about it, something that said a family lived here. She saw a man step out of the house, dressed in a long coat, hands in his pockets, eyes fixed on the ground. He bore a strong resemblance to Thomas. And instantly, Mila knew it had to be Alex. Mila didn't know what to do. She stood at a distance, feeling like she was intruding on someone's private world. But after a moment of hesitation, she walked closer. She stopped at the gate, intending to ask just one simple, respectful question, but found herself unsure how to begin. The man, apparently sensing someone at the gate, turned and looked at her. Mila quickly spoke up.
Hello, I'm Mila, a nurse at the hospital nearby. I've been caring for your father, Thomas Greaves.
The man's brow furrowed slightly, his eyes growing colder. He didn't smile, didn't greet her, just stared, waiting.
I just wanted to know if he's still in contact with the family.
The man stood silent for a moment before replying, his voice sharp and clipped. He hasn't been my father for a long time. The response stunned Mila into silence. Before she could say anything more, Alex turned and walked back into the house. Never looking back, Mila stood there for a moment, feeling the chill in the air, the tension, the bitterness. She couldn't understand what had happened between them. All she knew was that Thomas wasn't the only one carrying pain in this family. Back at the hospital, Mila couldn't shake the weight in her chest. There was more to this story, something deeper, something still hidden. And she knew now, if she truly wanted to understand, she'd have to look beyond what Thomas had told her. Thomas sat quietly by the window, his eyes following the hurried raindrops as they streaked down the glass like they were washing away memories that refused to fade. Mila stood nearby, watching him closely, sensing the pain and numbness behind his distant gaze. Finally, after a long silence, Thomas spoke. His voice was gravelly, as if each word carried a weight he could no longer avoid.
It's been so long, too long. But there's one thing I can't forget. A night just like this one, with rain.
He paused, his eyes never leaving the view outside. Mila stepped closer, then sat down beside him, leaving a respectful space. She knew how hard it was for him to open up, but today, somehow, Thomas seemed ready.
I haven't lived a good life. There was drinking, failure, mistakes, big ones. But everything I did, in the end, it was to protect my son. I thought I could make things right. I was wrong.
Mila stayed silent, listening, her eyes locked on him. Thomas exhaled a long breath, then continued, each word a shard of memory he could no longer hold in.
That night, Alex was just 17. He took my car without asking to go to a party. He'd had a few beers. The rain was pouring. I knew he was scared, tired. I never imagined, in his panic, he'd hit someone, a homeless man. No one knew who he was. Alex didn't even realize. He thought it was a dog or maybe just his eyes playing tricks with the rain and headlights. He didn't stop. He drove home in shock, not knowing what had really happened.
Thomas choked up, his words faltering. Mila sat still, her heart tightening, but she said nothing. Thomas took a deep breath before continuing, his voice quieter now, heavier.
The police came quickly. I knew if they found out it was Alex, it would ruin him. He was just a kid, with his whole life ahead. So I took the fall. I told them I was the one behind the wheel, just one lie. And I went to prison for 7 years for a mistake my son made.
He paused, turning to Mila with eyes so tired. It looked as though the weight of those years had drained the last of his strength. She saw the pain there, the sorrow and guilt he had carried alone.
Ever since I got out, he hasn't called me his father. I can't blame him. But I can't keep living with this truth either.
Mila sat frozen. Unable to find words, she felt the cruelty of the wounds Thomas bore, scars that would never fully heal. Not just because of loss, but because of the kind of sacrifice that asks for nothing in return. The winter air was bitterly cold, and a light rain fell in soft, invisible threads against the window panes. Mila stood in front of Alex's house, clutching her coat tight, feeling a chill that came not just from the outside but from something colder growing inside her chest. She knew what she was about to say would change everything. But some truths couldn't stay buried forever. After hearing Thomas's story, her heart had felt like it was being crushed. She couldn't believe that the father Alex had spent years resenting could have sacrificed so much. But she also knew if Alex didn't hear the truth, all three of them would remain trapped in darkness. Mila took a deep breath and knocked gently on the door. The sound echoed through the stillness of the winter afternoon like the arrival of something inevitable. The door opened, and there stood Alex, his eyes filled with suspicion. He looked at Mila like he already knew why she had come, but couldn't hide the tension in his face. "What are you doing here? You know something, don't you?" Mila didn't answer right away. She simply looked into his eyes. She knew what she was about to say might hurt him, but silence would only make things worse.
Alex, I don't want to hurt you, but you need to know the truth. What happened that night with your father? It's not what you think.
Alex frowned, confusion spreading across his face. "What are you talking about, my father? What gives you the right to come here and talk about him?" Mila stepped forward, her voice steady, but full of compassion.
You don't know this, but your father did everything to protect you. He took the blame for you. Alex, he said he was the one driving that night just so you wouldn't have to live with it. You were the one behind the wheel. Alex.
Alex froze, his eyes widened with disbelief, as if the ground had just shifted beneath him. He shook his head, his voice trembling with anger. "What are you saying? That I was driving? That he went to prison for me? You think I'm supposed to believe that out of pity?" He took a step back, his face contorted with rage, unable to process what Mila had just said.
"You don't know anything. He left me. He left my mother. And now you show up telling me he did it out of love. No, I don't believe you."
Mila stood still, her eyes filled with sorrow as she watched every word hit him like a storm. She knew the truth hurt, but it needed to be told. She didn't expect him to forgive, not yet. She only wanted him to understand that his father had given up everything. For him.
I'm not asking you to believe me right now, Alex. But your father sacrificed everything to protect you. He didn't want you to live with that guilt. That was his choice. That was his love.
Alex didn't reply. He simply turned and walked back into the house. He said nothing more, but Mila saw it, the war behind his eyes, the struggle between anger and disbelief. She stood there at the door, heart aching as she watched him disappear into the shadows of his home. She knew the truth couldn't be erased, no matter how painful. All she could do now was hope. Hope that one day Alex would understand his father's sacrifice and find his way back to him. The harsh winter pressed on, heavy rains pouring relentlessly, as if the sky were trying to wash away every trace of the earth below. In his hospital room, Thomas lay quietly on the bed, his face sunken, his eyes clouded with exhaustion. though he tried to sit up. His body could no longer support him. The chill from the rain-soaked days seemed to have seeped into his bones. All that remained were dry, laboured coughs, each one a warning of his fading health. Mila entered the room with a fresh blanket, but the moment she saw Thomas, she couldn't hide her concern. She gently placed the blanket over him and sat down beside the bed, watching him in silence. She knew his time was running short. Thomas didn't turn to look at her. His eyes stayed on the window, watching the endless rain. He said nothing, only coughed weakly, like a breeze slowly stealing what little life he had left.
You're not well. The doctor said only a few weeks left.
Thomas didn't respond. He simply sighed and raised a trembling hand to his mouth as another coughing fit overtook him. Mila felt a deep ache inside her chest. Watching the man slowly being consumed by illness and powerless to stop it.
You've carried this alone for so long, Thomas. But if you don't let it go, if you don't find some kind of closure, you won't find peace.
After a long pause, Thomas finally turned toward her. His eyes were dim, but something in his gaze made Mila feel the weight of a weariness no words could carry. At last, he spoke, his voice raspy and thick.
You know, I've lived my whole life in silence, to protect my son. But now, with everything coming to an end, I don't know what I can do anymore.
Mila looked at him with quiet understanding. She knew the love behind his sacrifice. She knew he had done it all for Alex. But would Alex ever see it, ever accept it?
You've done everything you could. Thomas, don't carry more regret than you already have.
Thomas didn't reply. He leaned back against the bed, eyes closing, letting the coughs shake his frail body. Mila sat beside him, feeling as if she too were caught in the tide of his sorrow. Illness hadn't just taken Thomas's strength, it had drained the last hope of a peaceful ending. A moment later, when the coughing finally subsided, Thomas opened his eyes and looked at Mila with surprising clarity, as if a decision had taken shape inside him.
Mila, there's something I need you to do. If you can give this letter to Alex, his father, I want him to hear at least one apology, while there's still time.
Mila met his gaze. His eyes were full of resolve, as if this, above all else, had to be done before the end came. She took the letter from his hand, feeling her heart tighten with the weight of what was to come. She nodded, gently holding the letter, then stood to leave. But before she stepped away, she turned back and looked at him one last time.
I'll do what you asked, but you need to remember no matter what. You did what you could. You gave everything for your son.
Thomas looked at her, his expression calm, and then a faint smile barely there. But real crossed his lips, as if, finally, he could let go with a little bit of peace in his heart.
Mila stepped into Alex's home with Thomas's letter in hand, her heart heavy. She didn't know if Alex would even read it, but she knew this was the last thing Thomas could offer his son. She stopped just outside the living room, her eyes falling on Alex's back as he sat in silence. He didn't turn, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. As she walked closer, Alex slowly turned, his eyes weary and guarded.
Alex, I have a letter from your father. He wanted you to read it.
Alex looked at the letter in her hand, his expression unchanged. He didn't speak right away, just stared at it, as if wrestling with something inside. When he finally did speak, His voice had lost the anger it once carried. What remained was only exhaustion.
I don't want anything from him. He went to prison for me. Sure, but he's not the man I needed.
Mila didn't respond. She simply placed the letter gently on the table, whether Alex accepted it or not. She had fulfilled Thomas's final wish.
He did everything he could to protect you. He took the blame so you wouldn't have to carry it. He gave up everything so you could still have a future.
Alex furrowed his brow. His eyes still held doubt and fatigue. He looked at Mila like he wanted to believe her, but wasn't ready.
You don't understand. He left me. He left my mum. And now you want me to believe he did it all for love. I can't.
Mila felt her chest tighten. She understood Alex's pain, but the truth had to be faced, no matter how difficult. She stepped a little closer, meeting his gaze.
I'm not asking you to believe it right now. Alex, just keep the letter. Maybe one day, when you're ready, you'll read it, and you'll understand.
Alex said nothing. He looked at the letter, picked it up for a moment but didn't open it. Instead, he set it back down, coldly.
Please go. I don't want to read it.
Mila held his gaze for a moment longer, feeling the storm within him. She knew she couldn't force him. She had done all she could. Quietly, she turned and walked away, saying nothing more. But in her heart, she still held on to one hope that maybe, not today, not tomorrow, but someday, Alex would see what his father had done for him. Mila stepped out of the house into the grey afternoon, the weight in her chest growing heavier with every step. She knew that time was the only thing left that might heal what had been broken. But would it be enough to mend the deepest wounds in Alex's heart? Mila returned to the hospital with a heavy heart. The letter still sat unopened on the table in Alex's living room. She didn't know if he would ever read it, but at least she had done her part. She had brought him the chance. Whether Alex was strong enough to face the painful truth was something only time could decide. The moment she entered Thomas's hospital room, she felt something had shifted. Thomas lay still, his eyes turned toward the window, where the rain continued to fall without end. Mila stepped inside, careful not to break the silence. She sat quietly beside his bed, watching the man who had grown too weary of life.
He received the letter, Thomas. But he didn't open it.
Thomas didn't respond, only let out a quiet sigh, as if he had known this all along. He closed his eyes, resting his frail hands over his chest, and then looked once more toward the window, as if waiting for something.
He's angry. He doesn't believe it. He won't accept it. I couldn't do anything more than give him the letter.
Thomas opened his eyes and looked at Mila with a tired gaze full of quiet understanding. He said nothing at first, letting the sound of rain outside speak for everything that had passed.
I know. I always knew he wouldn't accept it easily. But at least I tried. If I could change things, I would have long ago. But sometimes love isn't enough to heal every wound.
Mila felt a deep ache spread through her chest. She knew Thomas had lived in silence for so many years, not out of weakness, but perhaps as a way to protect himself and to shield Alex from a truth too harsh to carry.
You did everything you could. Thomas, no one could have loved their child more.
Thomas closed his eyes again, a faint, fragile smile crossing his face as if, at last, he had found some sliver of peace in his final days.
I just hope one day he'll understand. But at least now, I can go without regret. I did one last thing for my son.
Mila sat beside him in silence, saying nothing more. She understood now there are things in life we cannot change. All we can do is accept them and place our hope in a future we may never see. Outside, the rain kept falling, the droplets streaking down the window like reflections of memories that refused to fade. But inside the room, silence settled, awaiting only time could answer. The dim winter morning light filtered through the hospital window, casting long shadows across the cold floor. The rain had stopped, but the air remained heavy with moisture. Mila sat by the window, her gaze lost beyond the glass, her heart burdened with unspoken thoughts. She knew Thomas didn't have much time left, and that soon. Whatever remained unsaid would stay that way forever. Thomas lay quietly in his bed, his breathing steady but faint, though his eyes were barely open. Mila could sense a kind of peace in the rhythm of his breath, as if he had finally let go of all burdens, preparing for the journey ahead. She rose and walked slowly to his bedside, looking at him one more time. Thomas didn't speak, but there was something in his expression, something distant. Like a farewell he couldn't quite speak aloud. The years behind him, filled with sacrifice and silence, had distilled into one final hope that Alex might one day understand and forgive. The door to the room opened, and the doctor entered with a nurse. They checked the monitors, took his blood pressure. Mila stepped aside, standing quietly in the corner, not wanting to interrupt. She glanced at the clock on the wall. Time seemed to move slower here. She knew that every minute was a fragile thread.
His condition is declining quickly. We'll continue to monitor him. But I don't believe there's much time left.
Mila nodded, her chest tightening with the weight of what she already knew. She looked back at Thomas, the man she had come to know across countless, quiet shifts. A man who had lived a life defined by silence. Now, he stood at the threshold of goodbye, and he might never know whether his son would forgive him. The doctor and nurse stepped out, leaving Mila alone with Thomas. She moved closer to the bed and looked down at his closed eyes. A quiet sigh escaped her lips before she spoke, even though she knew he might not hear her.
You've done everything you could, Thomas. What's left now is for you to find peace, knowing that someday he'll understand. He won't forget you even if it takes time.
Thomas gave no reply. Only the soft sound of his breath remained, as if he were listening but had no strength left for final words. Mila quietly sat down beside him, gently took his hand, and held it her silent goodbye.
Outside, the rain began again, softly tapping against the windows, but this time, Mila didn't feel the sorrow it once brought in Thomas's silence. There was a peace she had never known before, and maybe that was all he needed in the end, the forgiveness he gave, and the quiet acceptance as he let go.
Winter continued to drift quietly past, but inside the hospital room, everything seemed to have stilled. The rain outside tapped gently against the window, painting long trails across the glass. Thomas lay in his hospital bed, the dim glow of the bedside lamp casting soft shadows over his gaunt face. Mila could see he was more tired now, his strength fading, but he still held on to something resolute, as if unwilling to let go. She sat beside his bed in silence, watching him. Time was slipping away, and the chances to change anything were growing fewer by the day. The doctor had made it clear he had only weeks left, and yet what Thomas had done for Alex still echoed in Mila's heart. A light cough stirred Thomas awake. He opened his eyes and looked at Mila, though his vision was clouded. There was still clarity in his gaze. He understood what was happening. Mila reached for his hand, feeling the cold, fragile weight of it in her own.
You've done all you could. You gave up everything. Thomas.
Thomas slowly turned his eyes to her, as if trying to speak but said nothing. His hand tightened slightly around hers, passing along the last traces of strength he had left. In that moment, nothing else needed to be said. There was understanding between them, quiet and complete. The doctor entered and began checking Thomas's vitals. Mila stepped back, standing quietly in the corner. The doctor looked over the readings, then turned to Mila.
His condition isn't improving. He's fading fast. His body is fragile. If nothing changes, all we can do is wait.
Mila nodded, her chest tightening with fear but also acceptance, like before. There was nothing more she could do but stay beside him, to keep him from being alone in his final days. After the doctor left, silence returned to the room. Thomas lay still, eyes fixed on the ceiling, exhaling a long breath as though bracing himself for the inevitable journey ahead. Mila sat by his side once more, letting time pass in quiet companionship, allowing him to rest. A long while later, Thomas spoke, his voice barely more than a whisper, yet filled with resolve.
I did the best I could. There's only one thing left I want. Mila, if you can, please tell Alex that I love him, and that I don't regret anything.
Mila felt her throat tighten. She held his hand more firmly and nodded. No words needed. She understood his sacrifice had said everything, even if the truth wasn't accepted right away. At least Thomas could leave this world with peace in his heart. Outside, the rain continued to fall as if the sky, too, wept for things left unfinished. Mila stood, gently adjusting the blanket over Thomas's chest, then turned to look at him one last time. Her heart was full of compassion and hope that one day, maybe late, but not too late, Alex would understand what his father had done for him. Winter still cast its long shadow over the hospital, the rain continuing its steady rhythm, drawing long streaks down the window glass. Mila stepped into the room and saw Thomas lying quietly in bed, though he was barely tethered to the world now. There was still a faint light in his eyes, as if he were searching for something left unfinished. She approached and sat beside him, gently taking his hand in hers. The love and sacrifice he had made for Alex lingered in her mind, weighing heavily on her heart. She had delivered the letter, and though Alex hadn't opened it yet, at least Thomas had said what needed to be said. Nothing could take away a father's final words once spoken. Thomas didn't look at her. He let out a long breath. Heavy coughing drained what little strength remained, but there was a quiet calm behind his eyes. Mila studied the lines of his weathered face and felt a deep ache. After all the pain he had endured, perhaps he would leave this world never knowing whether Alex would ever change.
You've done everything. Thomas, you sent the letter. He'll read it when he's ready.
Thomas closed his eyes, his lips pressed slightly together, as if searching for the right words. After a long pause, he opened his eyes again. They seemed lighter, free of fear.
I know. I've done what I could. I just wonder, will he ever understand?
Mila met his gaze, sensing the strength still carried in his words. Even as his body failed him, she didn't need to say much. She simply held his hand tighter.
You did it all for him. You gave everything. That's what matters. Maybe time will help him see. Time. That's all it takes. Thomas.
Thomas sighed, his eyes drifting toward the ceiling, and in that moment something in him seemed to settle, peace, at last. touched his expression. Not everything could be fixed. Not now, but at least he had spoken his truth. At least he could let go without regret. A short while later, Thomas closed his eyes again, and his face softened into stillness. The final cough faded, and the room returned to silence. Mila stood, stepped quietly out of the room. She knew that in Thomas's final moments, he had found the peace he'd long sought. For Alex, the journey would take longer. Forgiveness, understanding, they never came easily. But the words had been spoken. That was what mattered now. She exited the hospital, lifting her gaze toward the grey sky above. The rain still fell, softly, endlessly, like it, too, shared in the sorrow and in the quiet hope of a father's final, unspoken love. Unspoken. The days passed in quiet stillness. Mila could do nothing more than care for Thomas and watch as his strength slowly faded. And yet, during those days, something had shifted. The letter, his final words to Alex, remained with her, unopened. She didn't know if Alex would ever truly understand his father's sacrifice, but she knew one thing: only time could heal wounds that deep. One morning, as she entered the hospital, she sensed it immediately. Something in the air had changed. It was as if Thomas now hovered at the threshold between life and death. The coughing had stopped. He lay still, completely silent. Mila didn't need the doctor to tell her. She already knew. His time was drawing to an end. She stepped into his room, where Thomas lay motionless. His eyes were half closed, his hands cold. Mila sat beside him, gently holding his hand. She said nothing, only stayed close, unwilling to let go. These were the final moments she could share with him. After a while, Thomas stirred, his lips curled into a faint smile, though his face had grown pale and thin. He no longer worried about Alex, not because he had received forgiveness, but because he had done what he could.
Thank you, Mila. I can go in peace, knowing I did the right thing.
Mila held his hand tighter, feeling the strength behind his fading words. She knew the truth he had spoken, the love he had given, the pain he had carried. None of it would be forgotten.
You gave everything. Thomas, even if Alex isn't ready yet, one day, he will be.
Thomas didn't reply. He only smiled again, softer this time. His eyes became calm, as though some burden had finally been released. Then he let out a quiet breath and slowly closed his eyes as if preparing for the next journey.
What followed was deep, sacred silence. Mila sat by his side, saying nothing more. Thomas passed peacefully, wrapped in love and sacrifice, his final gift to a son he never stopped loving. A while later, Mila rose and stepped out of the room. She knew that Alex didn't yet understand, but maybe tomorrow, or someday, he would. A father's sacrifice cannot be erased, and that Thomas had hoped above all. Thomas had. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained overcast. Mila left the hospital with a strange calm in her chest. She couldn't change the past, but she had done all she could to help Thomas find peace. It was the last gift she could give him. As she walked away from the hospital, the letter still lingered in her thoughts. It had been delivered to Alex, but whether he had opened it, she didn't know. It was no longer in her hands, now. All that remained was silence between them, and a hope that one day Alex would understand everything his father had done. Time would be the one to answer. That was all she could trust now that truth would one day come to light, and Thomas's sacrifice would not be forgotten. Mila turned for one last glance at the hospital, the place where Thomas had waited for the answers he would never live to hear. She couldn't change what had been, but she had done what she could. The rest now rested with Alex. And she knew, not today, not tomorrow, but someday, time would help him see. And then he would know what Thomas had done for love and for a sacrifice beyond words. Thank you for listening to the story. If you have any thoughts, feel free to share them in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you. Once again, I'm really happy to have you here. Don't forget to subscribe so we can keep sharing more stories about life together. Take care and see you next time.